My name is Katie Blackley. I am a digital editor and reporter with 90.5 WESA. We are the local NPR station and public radio, so we are listener supported, but I'm really glad to be talking with you all. I am the main producer of our Good Question series, which is a listener-oriented, created, inspired program that we've been doing for about 3 years. It originally started in Chicago under this group called Harkin, and they would do Curious City is what it was called. And it's based on people sending in questions that they've always wondered about Pittsburgh or the city that they live in or the region where they are. And then I go out and I try to answer them for them. So we've gotten over 900 questions in the past few years. So it's impossible to answer them all because we are a small newsroom, but we do what we can and it's been really fun. We get anything from, why is Pittsburghese a thing? Why do people say yins and nat and all that stuff? To, what used to be on my street? Why is it called this specific thing? So it's been a lot of fun. We've been able to do a few different programs around it, like engaging people back when that was a thing. And yeah, so I'm here to tell you a little bit about some of the stories that I've produced. I chose 4 for you. So the final story I'm going to tell you all about is called One Quiet Pittsburgh Neighborhood is Home to a Civil War Fort. This was a question from Chris Como. He lives in Stanton Heights, and he's a Good Question listener, a very curious person. He asked this question. He says, I was curious about Fort Krogen. I heard there was some remains in the woods on the private property of the elderly folks home there. I had never heard of any of this. I don't go to Stanton Heights much. And honestly, I have a Civil War Pittsburgh book, but I hadn't gotten through to it yet. So I read that book and I was like, okay, I know a little bit more about Pittsburgh and the Civil War now. This is cool. And they played a pretty significant role. I learned in terms of like ammunitions and weaponry, and again, this was a very industrial area, so they were able to ship a lot of things to where the battle was actually happening. But the battle never actually came to Pittsburgh. However, that didn't stop people from worrying about it. So I learned by talking with Michael Kraus, who is a curator at Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall and Museum, which is in Oakland. It's on 5th Avenue. You will know it when you see it. It is beautiful, inside and outside, and it's a place to memorialize veterans and people who have served. And Michael is a dear friend at this point because I interview him so much. He talked me through, he was like, yeah, people were really scared that the war was going to come to them. So they built fortifications. And my idea of a fortification is like a big stone wall or something, just whatever Game of Thrones kind of thing. And he was like, no, it wasn't always like that. Like, it wasn't that advanced. And he said some of them were just like mounds of dirt, like big mounds of dirt where soldiers could hypothetically, hide behind. And he said they were all around the city. There were like 20 or 30 of them, just kind of positioned throughout different strategic locations in Pittsburgh. Many of them were on hills because we are a very hilly place. It's also better strategically. So he was like, yeah, no, I definitely have heard of Fort Krogen. William Krogen was a wealthy lawyer, and he built a mansion for his only daughter, Mary. So she went on to marry a British officer named Edward Shenley, and then she became Mary Shenley. So you can see, if you're familiar with Shenley Park and kind of the history of the Shenleys in Pittsburgh, it was one of those Pittsburgh stories where their names are just everywhere. So Fort Krogen was on the estate of the Krogen family in Stanton Heights. So I found that map, and Michael kind of pointed out, we kind of overlaid it together, the historic map and the modern map. And he was like, yeah, it's probably maybe around like this intersection here. So I met up with Chris, the listener who asked the original question, and we walked up into the woods. We asked permission from the elderly folks' home that he had mentioned, which was kind of 200 feet from the woods, but it's still that property, and I didn't want to, get anybody in trouble or myself. And even when I asked permission, I was just like, I'm a reporter. We've heard that there's this thing over here. Like, do you mind if we just check it out? We're not going to do anything else. And they're like, oh yeah, it's in there. Yeah, for sure. And I was like, oh, cool. Okay, we're in the right place. But we wanted to actually find it, like actually see if there was remains, like Chris had asked. So we walked in, we're walking around, and then he goes, wait a minute, look at this. And all the trees around us were really big and thick and old, and you could tell they had been there for a long time. And then there was this row of really young ones, and they were spaced out more, and it wasn't as dense there. And we looked down, and we were actually up on higher ground at that point because we figured out that we were on the mound. We had found it, and it was really cool. And I called Michael the next day, the curator from the Soldiers and Sailors, and I showed him some pictures, and I was like, does this seem like what it is? And he was like, wow, yeah. And he had never gone in. He was like kind of intrigued by it too. So that was a really cool and very fulfilling story. But I wanted to double check it with some people. So I checked in with the History Center, and they said, yeah, that seems about right. And it was really fun. It was a really cool way of answering the question, especially bringing the listener along so we could have that conversation. And back when we used to have people in the station, I would bring them in. I would say, hey, we've chosen your question. Why don't you come to the station and we can talk about it, and then we can give you a tour, because odds are if you're writing into the station, you're probably a fan of it. So you might want to see some of the voices that you hear. And that was really fun. So that's a really fun story. Definitely check out the pictures, because you can see Chris in the woods kind of walking, and you can even notice the trees being further away from each other. So thank you so much for listening to me. Keep being curious and listen to the station and learn about the city.